Hi, I'm Clint Alley. I did my focus paper on illustrator Christopher Byng. Christopher Byng is a very interesting person. He is a Caldecott Honor Award winning illustrator. He has done some very famous editorial cartoons for very large and prestigious newspapers. He is a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, where his most influential instructor was none other than Chris Van Allsburg, whom he credits for a lot of his inspiration in some of his works. He has done work that brings attention to drugs, crime, the AIDS epidemic, and human trafficking. He's a champion of many progressive causes. But the reason I'm dressed in this costume is his greatest work, probably the thing he's best known for, is a children's book in which he brings the great American pastime to life in a way that no one else really ever has. So let's go to the ball field.
Casey at the Bat is a 13-stanza poem by Ernest Lawrence Thayer. Originally published in 1888 in the San Francisco Examiner, the poem is a classic of American literature. It tells the story of Casey, the star player of a baseball team called the Mudville Nine. After a surprise play brings the Mudville Nine within reach of winning the game, Casey steps up to the plate. Tension mounts in the crowd as the fate of the entire game rests on the star player's actions. But when Casey allows two perfectly good pitches to go by without swinging, before striking out without even making contact with the ball, his humiliation is complete. Casey's hubris cost the Mudville Nine the game. Christopher Byng's illustrations in his 2000 version of Casey at the Bat are rich in texture, featuring detailed, historically inspired illustrations accompanied by images of various classic baseball ephemera. The finished product is intended to look like a scrapbook of newspaper clippings from the 1880s. In a note at the end of the book, Byng describes the process of creating the finished product, saying, "The black and white illustrations were drawn using pen, ink, and brush on white uninked scratchboard. These drawings, which mirror period newspaper woodcut etchings, were digitally compressed into multiple layers, using a series of complex operations involving mirrored photocopies on acetate, 100% cotton rag watercolor paper soaked in warm acetone baths, and watercolors." Byng used his brother-in-law as the model for his drawings of Casey. Making a surprise guest appearance in the book was noted Harvard professor and scholar Henry Louis Gates, who was the model for Byng's drawings of the umpire. Gates, a close friend of Byng, was instrumental in introducing the illustrator to his publisher. The attention to detail in Byng's version of Casey at the Bat netted him a Caldecott Honor Award in 2001.
Christopher Byng's first children's book was such a success that he immediately set to work on another one following the same concept. He took another great American classic poem and created a children's book out of it in his own visually stunning, unique way of drawing and illustrating. This time, he went for inspiration back to his hometown. He went to Lexington, Massachusetts, where he's lived for many years. Mr. Byng actually, I believe, graduated from high school in Lexington, Massachusetts. And Lexington, Massachusetts is, of course, the site of the first battle of the American Revolution. And it's also the destination of one of American history's most famous midnight riders.
Byng's second book, like his first, was an homage to a classic poem. Embracing his hometown's place in American history, Byng illustrated Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Like Casey at the Bat, Byng's version of Midnight Ride made use of rich, historically inspired woodcut illustrations and digital images of strategically placed historical artifacts. The illustrations in Byng's Midnight Ride are meticulously researched, as evidenced by the copious bibliography included at the end of the book. While researching his illustrations, Byng consulted some of the nation's leading Revere historians and even got access to climb into the belfry of the Old North Church, where Longfellow's famous one if by land, two if by sea lanterns were hung to alert Revere about British troop movements. Bing's illustrations for Midnight Ride were watercolor glazes washed over scratchboard paintings, all to give the illustrations a patina of antiquity. Everything about the book was designed to highlight the historical richness of Longfellow's words, even down to the selection of a reconstructed 18th century typesetter's font, the same font used in the first printing of the Declaration of Independence.
Mr. Bing's most controversial work is a reimagining of the 19th century children's book Little Black Sambo, a story with a sordid and racist past about a creative young boy who outwits jungle predators and is rewarded at the end with a feast of pancakes. The decision to illustrate this old book was one that Bing knew would probably ruffle a few feathers. In fact, in the book's introduction, he wrote that the story is one of the most misunderstood, infamous, and banned children's books in the English language. Objections to Little Black Sambo through the years have ranged from the character's racially insensitive name to the stereotypical way in which African Americans were typically illustrated in early versions of the book. Bing was attempting, by illustrating this book, to reclaim the book and to recontextualize the book. For example, he points out that Little Black Sambo was originally set in India and that the author never intended for it to carry the racist connotations that it does. The real problem with this particular title, according to many historians, began when American publishers actually began to pirate the book because the author's copyright did not extend into the United States in 1899 when she wrote the book. And these early American versions of Little Black Sambo contained extraordinarily offensive, stereotypical illustrations of African Americans. Bing realized this, and his goal in reproducing Little Black Sambo with new illustrations was to change the context of the story and to make Sambo the hero of the story instead of an object of derision and ridicule. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the work and career of picture book illustrator Christopher Bing. He was an active picture book illustrator for just a little over 10 years, and he seems to be retired from that, and now he does pretty much full-time political cartooning. But his works, I've got several of them here. They are well worth your time. They're well worth a place in your library, and particularly Casey at the Bat, which I think everyone is probably familiar with, but may not have known the full story behind how Mr. Bing came to enjoy writing that story. I'm Clint Alley, and I have enjoyed being your host through this look at Christopher Bing's career. Have a great evening.